Okay, thank you, Dov, and thanks everybody. And today's topic is drones and privacy concerns that result from that. And a credit and thanks to Rabbi Micha Cohn, who put together these different sources and on this topic that we're going to be discussing. Amen. So, drones are very much in the news now. Not that long ago, they flew close to the White House, and that aroused some concerns. And there's talk in the news this past few days about the government requiring one to register their drones, and in order to be flying, I'd imagine at a certain height, right? So these are the more advanced type of drones, to have some sort of a civil aviation permit. And there's been much talk that it's just a matter of time, heaven forbid. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. It's a matter of time, heaven forbid, until one of these interferes with the hundreds of thousands of planes that are crisscrossing the country, and some sort of a serious disaster could result.
Or it could stop terrorists too.
Sorry?
It could stop a terrorist too.
It could stop a terrorist, or it could be under the employ of a terrorist. So there are lots of issues over here. We're going to be dealing with the halachic perspective on, is it permitted for me to fly my drone over someone else's property if that will infringe upon their privacy? Also, can I shoot down my neighbor's drone when he has the audacity to fly his drone over my private property? Right?
Is that only when he's naked sunbathing in the backyard?
It's not necessarily limited to that.
Sounds like something for lawyers.
Yes. And if the law of the land would permit this, under certain circumstances, would this affect the halacha? So first we want to deal with what is the halacha with my infringing on someone else's privacy. What is the halacha in terms of my ability to rescue myself from harm or danger? And so those are the halachot that we have. And does what we call dina de malchuta dina, which means the law of the kingdom wherein we live is the law. That takes on halachic status. So therefore, would a change in dina de malchuta, might that affect a change in the halacha? So, the very first page there, we begin with the very first daf, the very first page of Masechet Baba Batra. Now, Baba means a gate. There's Baba Kama, the first gate, Baba Metzia, the second gate, Baba Batra, the last gate. Actually, Baba Kama the first, Baba Metzia the middle gate, Baba Batra the last gate. And that is that we had a tractate that deals with damages of all sorts, that was comprised, that was split up into three separate gates. The first one is 119 pages, folios. The second one is 119 folios, and the third one, I believe is 176. Might be 173. I believe it's 176 pages. So it's quite extensive. This is the start of the last one, and the Gemara begins. We have it both in Hebrew and English. Hashutfin sharatzu la'asot mechitza b'chatzer. Now the English. The Gemara debates what is the meaning here. And the English reads it, if joint owners agree to make a mechitza in a courtyard. If they decide, they agree that they want to build a wall. Now, according to that definition, partners who are sharing a courtyard. Now, the courtyard, realize, was connected to the houses, and much of their private dealings were done outside in a courtyard. So the Mishnah says, the shutrin that want to make, let's just say a mechitza, let's not translate the word mechitza yet. They want to make a mechitza in the courtyard. Bonin et hakotel be'emtza. They're going to build that wall where? Right smack in the middle. Makom shenago lavnot gavil, gazid, kapis, and levanin, bonin akol, kamena gamadina. The size of the wall, the thickness of that wall, that follows the local custom. If it's going to be, let's just say, a 10-inch thick wall, then each of the neighbors have to give 5 inches off the dividing line from their property in order to accommodate this wall.
You're actually saying building code.
I'm sorry?
Building code.
Yes. Now, there are 2 ways to define the word mechitza, with very different halachic results. If we're going with the way the English chooses, if joint owners agree to make a mechitza meaning a wall, then they'll build that wall in the middle. What's strange according to this explanation is, why does the Mishnah use 2 different terms for the wall? Why does they want to build a mechitza, so they'll build the wall in the middle, right? They should say, use the same term. But according to this, they only will build this wall if they both choose to build the wall. But let's say I want a wall and you don't want a wall, then this Mishnah's law does not apply. I might be able to build a wall at my expense on my property, but I won't be able to force you to absorb half of the cost and to give half of the land. The way, as we'll soon see in the Rambam, the halacha understands this Mishnah is otherwise. They understand the Mishnah, partners that want to make a division. Because we are joint owners of a property. Fair enough, we're joint owners. Now we want to divide the property. Then what must we do, as long as at least one of us wants? We must build a wall. Why? And the term the Gemara uses is hezek re'iyah. Hezek re'iyah is the damage that is done by your visibility, your ability to see into my private area. And not just into my house. Steve mentioned earlier that when Bilam went to curse the Jewish people, he gave a blessing, or he gave a nod of how beautiful are the tents of Israel, and Rashi brings that was a reference to the privacy that is afforded to each house, that the tent doors are not aligned with one another. So when you open your door and they open their door, you don't see what's going on in one another's house. And I've commented before about how here in Irvine, in University Park at least, where the houses are fairly close to one another and often attached to one another, nevertheless, they are designed and constructed in a way that every person, when they walk into their property, they feel like they're walking into their own private little domain. And there's very, very strict laws about windows facing into others' property, and it's done in a very proper and dignified manner. So those are the 2 ways of learning the Mishnah. Either the partners who want to build a wall will do so, but one can't force the other, which would imply that the damage of vision, the damage of looking into others' property is not an issue. The other way is no. If partners want to divide, they must build a wall, because the issue of seeing into someone else's property is definitely an issue.
There's another issue.
Yes?
Would be the wall. Say you're growing something over there in the garden, and the wall's blocking the sun.
Okay, we'll come to the garden in a minute, Tov. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'hakol niyeh b'baro.
Amen.
Let us see on the bottom of the first side of the page, let us see how the Rambam views this. Okay, yeah, so Warren, so the questions are, my drone flying over other people's property, right, and infringing on their privacy. Second step would be my ability to take action against my neighbor's drone that's flying over my property and infringing upon my privacy. And the third aspect will be the dina, the malchuta dina, the laws of the kingdom being laws. Will that affect how the halacha would be in these situations?
So, just one quick question, like a drone can see over the wall. Doesn't have to be on your property, can be looking,
Well,
taking
it
photographs.
goes up.
Goes up, but it can take photographs.
It can take photographs. It can also fly right over my property.
But it could be over my property, still take photographs of your property.
I believe so. Yeah, yeah,
Is that
yeah.
a separate issue? Is that a...
The issue is not so much. Well, you're raising an interesting point. Now, as we'll see in the mission over here, the hezek re'iyah, the damage of someone seeing into my property, is not limited to him being in my airspace. On the contrary, we're talking about two partners, and I'm looking, and I'm standing there by the fence saying, this is better than television, right? This is fascinating. Wow, every night, I'll tune in at 6 p.m., right? It beats the 6 o'clock news, right? So there, you're not over my property. So it really is, regardless of where one is standing, but is one peering into the other's property. So we see there are two ways of understanding the word mechitza. Either the partners who want to make a wall, or the partners who want to separate. The halacha, let's take a look in the Rambam. I have it both in Hebrew and English. If there is a courtyard belonging to two partners that is large enough that one can force the other to divide it. It needs to be a certain size in order for me to force you to divide it. If it's too small and it's going to be basically useless for what a courtyard is normally used, then you can't force me, I can't force you to split it. But if it is large enough that one can force the other to split it, or it wasn't necessarily large enough, but we agreed that we wanted to split it, right? Even though it's not large enough to say it's not large enough to have forced one another. Each one can force the other. Once we've agreed to divide it, each one can force the other to carry the costs to build this wall in the middle. In order that my neighbor should not see me when I'm using my yard. Shehezek re'iyah hezeku. The damage that is done by someone being able to watch me, that is considered a hezek. Ve'ein lo chazaka b'chatzer ela aval pi she'amdu kach she'en rabot b'lo mechitza. And we can't say, listen, for years there's been no wall. Let's say we divide the chatzer, okay? And then I come to you 4 years later. I say, I insist on a wall. Now, often we say that when it comes to property, 3 years establishes a certain status quo. That 3-year status quo does not apply over here. So even though it's been many years, I can force my neighbor or my neighbor can force me. B'chol eitche yirtza, at any time he wants, because the infringement on another person's proper expectation of privacy is considered an infringement, right? Very often you see at these different rallies that often turn sort of violent and vulgar. So some people are filming it, taking videos of it, and usually the people who are vulgar and violent are not all that happy about that, and they often become even more vulgar and violent as a result, right? And what you often hear the person videoing it say is, there's no expectation of, what's the legal term, David? Is there no expectation of, I'm sorry? There's no expectation of privacy, and therefore, if you're doing things out in the public domain, there's no expectation of privacy, and someone else can film you. But where there is a proper expectation of privacy, then one can demand a wall, participation in the cost and in giving up property to support that wall, even though it's been like that for a while. Next halacha, kama gova hakotel. What is the height of this wall? Ein pachot me'arba amot. No less than 4 cubits. A cubit is an arm's length, which basically halacha we say is about 1.5 to 2 feet. It's only what we say, right? So minimally, it's anywhere between 6 and 8 feet, but it's minimally 6 feet, right? Now, for most, a 6-foot wall, right? For I think most of us, right? I think for most people would basically, give that privacy that's necessary. Kama gova kotel. I know when we replaced the fence in between myself and my neighbor, I think it had been a 5-foot wall, and we replaced it and it was falling apart, so we needed to all chip in and replace it. And we did a 6-foot wall. And whereas with the 5-foot wall, really we would see into one another's yard all the time, and you're trying to have dinner in the backyard. Hi, how you doing? Right? With the 6-foot wall, maybe not for you, Warren, but for me, the 6-foot wall, Linda, right? But for me, the 6-foot wall, right, made a tremendous difference in making it truly privacy for me and for them. V'chein begina, so too by a garden. Kofeil lahavdil gina to migina chavero b'mechitza gavoa sarat tvachim. There, 40 inches high, 30 to 40 inches high would suffice to separate a garden. By a garden, there is not this expectation of doing things that one would require or expect privacy in the garden. Now, the garden, we think of the garden as a yard. The garden, that's right. You're talking about a garden that is out where there are a number of gardens. Like think of more like small vegetable patches in a whole area. There's no expectation of privacy. One can expect there to be a wall to clearly delineate the areas. Okay. Aval bebika, if we're out in the fields, and we're out in the valley, in the plains, and I've got my field and you got your field, ain't sarach lavdil bikatom bikavachara el magam shanagu. There's no requirement at all to separate my area, my valley from yours, right? Unless that is the minhag of the place. Unless that is the custom of the place. That is the local custom. So we see here that infringing on someone else's home, yard, front yard, backyard, private property is halachically prohibited, right? And it's considered hezek, okay? And therefore that is clear. That hezek meaning damage, right? That is clear that it is damage. Now, what damage are we talking about? So some say that the damage is you're taking away my property, so to speak, because I can't use it fully, right? I can no longer use my backyard fully in the way that I have a justified expectation to use it. Right? I've got a pool, right, with a fence around it. So my understandable expectation is that there's privacy when I and my family go swimming. And now with a drone flying up, right, and filming, you are damaging my property. I can no longer utilize my property in the justifiably manner that I was expecting to use it. Okay. So therefore, it should follow, perhaps, that if I am in the pool and the drone comes overhead, I take that my slingshot or my, what are those called? Those the gushers, and I take it down, right? A good strong burst of my gusher, right? It'll destroy the battery. Bring that baby down, right? I can destroy it. Or can't I? So again, the Gemara now is in Baba Kama. The Gemara Baba Kama discusses a case. Okay, in the Hebrew, I should have marked it, I didn't, but in the lines of the Gemara, it is the fifth line down, or actually, yeah, the fifth line down. Third word is the abbreviation Tav Shin, which stands for Toshma. Come in here. Shur Sha'Allah al Gabi Chaveiro. I'm out with my ox, wherever it is, wherever I'm leading it to. Another ox comes and comes on top of it, right? Trying to do a job on my ox. Lahargo. Its intent, right? So this guy's ox is trying to kill my ox. Uba bal hatachton. And the owner of the ox that's under, that is in danger of being killed, came, v'shamat et shalo, pulled his ox out from under the one that was attacking it. The nafal elyon, and the one on top fell down, v'meit, and died. Pater. I, the owner of the ox that was being attacked, that I pulled my ox out, so I am exempt from any monetary compensation, any damages to be paid to the owner of the ox that I killed. The Gemara asks, and it's going into the issue over there, so we're not going to spend too much time. My love, B'muad, aren't we talking about that the ox that I saved, my ox, aren't we talking about that the ox that was attacking my ox was an established goring ox? It had a history. In which case the owner, had it killed my ox, the owner would have had to have paid full damages. And therefore I'm not really losing or gaining anything by my actions. The lack of saving, because there's no real loss. The Gemara says, no, bitam. We're talking about that the animal that was attacking my animal was a non-established goring ox, in which case the owner would only need to pay half the damages, and therefore I was at loss here. Right? The Gemara is discussing over here a greater issue of if a person can take the law into their own hands when there's not going to be any loss as a result. The Gemara says, well, let's go to the other case there. Let's say if instead of pulling my ox out from underneath, I pushed the ox on top off. Then, and it died, then I will be held liable. Now, if it was a non-established goring ox, and therefore, right, I was protecting my own property from the attack of someone else's property, why should I be held liable? Shahayalo l'shamto v'lo shamto. The Gemara says, you know why I'm liable? Because we're talking about a case where I could have just slipped my ox out. I didn't, in order to stop this from going through, I didn't have to kill. I didn't have to interact with that ox directly. I didn't have to kill that ox. I had a way of doing it without causing that result. Okay. So, what's clear is that I should not go ahead and damage the attacker. That I don't have carte blanche to do. Rather, I should pull my ox out from underneath. And if he gets damaged, then I am not responsible. That's what the Gemara says. Now, when it comes to the halacha, we have the Shulchan Aruch Harav and we have the Aruch HaShulchan. Okay, these are two different halachic works, and they have a different view on it. The Shulchan Aruch Harav explains that you've got to do everything that you can to not cause damage to someone else's property, even when that object is causing damage to you or your property. right? So if you can save without damaging, you must, right? Now, what does that imply? If you can save without damaging, you must. The implication is, if you can't save without damaging, then you may. If the only way to save your own ox is by direct damage to the other's ox, to the attacking ox, then it would be permitted. Right? So what's clear from the Gemara is that if you had another way out and you didn't use it, you're liable. What's not clear from the Gemara, from the Talmud, is if you didn't have another way out, are your hands tied, or then are you sanctioned to go ahead? The Shulchan Aruch HaRav understands you don't have another way out, then that's it. Then go for it. Right? You are allowed to directly damage. However, the Aruch HaShulchan understands it differently. He says, right, why am I allowed to pull my ox out? I'm not allowed to damage. I'm allowed to save. I'm allowed to rescue. I'm not allowed to damage. That's what he extracts from this Gemara. You're allowed to save, to rescue. You're not allowed to attack. And therefore, right, the reason why I can pull my ox out, because it's not an act of damaging, it's an act of saving. Right? And if it inadvertently gets damaged, I'm not responsible. Right? So it comes, according to him, it seems that to intentionally damage, even to protect your own property, right, would not be allowed. To intentionally damage, where you can do an act of rescuing, you can't do an act of damaging. Now, let's apply this now to shooting down, damaging a drone that is, right, soaking using one of those super soakers, right, to soak a drone that's coming over my pool, right, in order to make sure it will never take a picture of me again. Okay. Now, clearly, if there's another way to do it, right, then clearly that must be done, right? You should speak to the neighbor, right, and try to convince the person that this is infringing on your privacy, etc., 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 right? And that needs to be done first. If all attempts have failed, so again, Rav Micha Cohen, who's the author of this whole piece that I'm sharing with you, says that there might be a difference in opinion between the Shulchan Aruch HaRav and the Aruch HaShulchan. Right? The Shulchan Aruch HaRav says if that's the only way to do it, to stop the damage, and we've established that this is considered damage, right? Even though it's not as gross a case of damage as his ox attacking my ox, but we've established, we saw in the Rambam, that's how we understand the Mishnah in Baba Batra, that Hezek Re'i is considered damage. If the only way to stop the damage is by causing damage to that which is causing me the damage, then I am sanctioned to do so, right? And I could take down that drone, right, assuming that it's legal, right? Shooting the drone might not be legal, right? I would imagine, I wonder what the law would be. There's a drone flying over my pool, right? And I take my super soaker and I shoot my super soaker straight up my property. It went up my property, it came down on my property. Along the way, it took down my neighbor's drone. I would imagine by American law that I'm not responsible for that. I don't know.
It misfired.
Huh?
It misfired.
I don't know. David, what would you say?
If you used a gun, it would be different because you're shooting a firearm.
Right.
There are laws about firearms and shooting
Right.
that you may be violating regardless of what you're firing at.
Correct.
The super soaker on your own property, maybe you didn't see it. And it came down.
Yeah. But I'm saying, not only maybe I didn't see it, let's say I say, yes, I saw it. The guy, let's say I say to the judge, Your Honor, right? I have an expectation of privacy there. This guy's flying his drone with a camera over my property. And when I'm in the pool, I like to shoot my super soaker. And therefore I shot my super soaker at his drone. I did it intentionally, Your Honor. I could tell you that I didn't realize, I don't have my glasses on, I can't see a thing. I have many excuses, but I'm not claiming that. I saw it, and I shot it down. I agree. A firearm is a lot more difficult, right? To discharge a firearm is not a simple thing. Even one has a license to carry it, right? Interesting, right? But it would seem that this might be a difference of opinion that we have between the Shulchan Aruch HaRav's position, which is if there's no way to do without damaging, and the Aruch HaShulchan's position that one can rescue and save, one cannot attack and damage. Another case that he brought, which I didn't copy for us, is a neighbor's chicken. This is posed to the Chavas Yair and the Marasham. A storekeeper, right, had these chickens that kept coming in. Oh, actually, that was another case over there, right? My neighbor's animals keep coming into my field. Could I put out some poison? Could I put out poison in my field? In my field.
I have a lot of cats roaming my garden. My husband says, let me do some, he wants to do something. I said, no, you can't. You just can't.
Because it's tsar, well, there are a number of issues here. There's tsar balei chayim, right? There's causing the anguish to the animals, right? There is damaging someone else's property, even though they are in the process of damaging my property, right? The Maram's conclusion was, since the neighbor's intent is not to cause damage, he's being negligent, it would probably not be permitted to cause his animal to die, even indirectly. But we could infer from there that if his intention is, right, it's not that he's having fun flying his drone around that happens to go over my property, right? He hears the splash, and I hear the drone go up, right? That's what we're talking about over here, right? So it's interesting what the law would be in such a case, right? When he is intentionally planning on doing it. Now, the last idea that he brings up is that there's much talk now about legislation, right? I mentioned before, I think having to register with the civil aviation if it's a certain height that it goes to, whatever it is. Right? So there's an interesting question that was posed to Rav Moshe Feinstein, which I apologize is very small, but I wanted to save a few trees. So I got it all onto one page over here. Okay, Rav Moshe Feinstein was blessed memory, was the preeminent posek of the Torah world. Someone asked him, in Mutal Parnes, can a person get their livelihood from playing ball, even though there sometimes is physical harm that is caused to oneself or that one causes to others, right? Football is really under the microscope now. Right? You have a high school death. I think almost every couple of weeks there is a high school football player death. Right? You have all of the results of the concussions. I mean, there's a lot in the news going on now. If one can get their parnasa from the game of throwing kadurim, shenikra, that are called balaz, That's called ball in the foreign language, in English. Right? There's a certain percentage, might be 0.1%, right? Who get their lives can be in danger, right? Certainly something like boxing. I mean, boxing, the idea is to knock the guy senseless, right? To knock him out, that he can't move for 10 seconds. All he sees is stars, and he can't possibly get up. That is the goal. That's what one is trying to do. And I answered that it seems to me yesh lahatir, that we can allow it. He brings from the Gemara in Baba Metzia about a person having a dangerous profession and putting himself in danger, right? And we see you're allowed to choose a dangerous profession, right? So even though there's the concern that you might be hurting others, right? So hurting yourself or hurting others, it's all the same issue, right? We had a class on that, right? The issue of suicide, right, is that one is not allowed to take a life, regardless of it being someone else's life or one's own life. From a Torah perspective, we are not the owners of our life. We are granted a lease on life, but it's not ours to decide, oh, I've had enough of this. Well, I'm not hurting anyone else, I'm just hurting myself. It's not ours to make that decision. But he says, so if I can endanger, right, it's something that can endanger someone else, endangering myself, it's all the same thing. Now when, we're not talking about becoming a gladiator, right? We're talking about something where it is a small percentage. So therefore, it would seem, whether it's to yourself or someone else, right, as long as, right, that person, right, that's when the other person has also signed up for it. Everyone who's playing in this sports league, whatever it might be, understands that there is the possibility of serious harm being done. Right? So I'm taking that risk upon myself, right? Which is a big, that's the big issue between the players in the NFL. Certainly now, anyone who goes into football, so all the science is out there, and they know that they're taking a risk, and they've got the percentages that go into what is the life expectancy of an NFL player. But it is considerably lower than the life expectancy of the general population. So whereas the earlier generations of players can say, we had no way of knowing, right? And the football league perhaps did know but held back things, now it's all out there. So Rav Moshe said that one would be allowed to go ahead, right? Being that is the expectation, right? Now, so engaging in sports that may cause damage, everyone is voluntarily engaging in the sport, okay? Now, another issue that he mentions is liability from a motor vehicle accident. It could be that according to the Din Torah, I can't collect fully or from this person. Yet, according to the insurance laws, how it works here, I can collect. So therefore, I'm not going against Torah law when I'll have my insurance company collect whatever I rightfully can. Obviously, whatever I rightfully can collect. We're not talking about, my back, we're talking about, true damage and a true situation. Legally, all drivers have to have insurance. So therefore, I am submitting myself under the auspices of the law of the land when I'm driving. And therefore, we follow the law of the land. So therefore, if secular law would say that certain actions can be taken against a drone that violates my privacy, right, then it's very possible, and I would say even probable, that halacha would recognize that also. And one will be able to take those steps, right? If I'm flying my drone, then I'm submitting myself to the laws of the land, and anything that results within the parameters of the laws of the land is something that I'm taking upon myself. So again, in terms of question number one, flying my drone over other people's property, 100% clear, as we saw in the Rambam, Hezek Re'iyah Shmei Hezek. The damage of looking in and seeing other people where they have a justified expectation of privacy is considered damage. The damage is I am stealing their property or stealing the usage, the justified expectation of usage of their property. I am stealing that, and they can't use their property. That is considered stealing, right? What can I do if someone else is violating my privacy? That is not clear, right? If there's a way that I can do it, that my intervention is indirect, then it probably would be permitted, right? But if the flyer does not intend menace, and the only way that I can do it is by seriously damaging his piece of machinery over there, then it is very, very questionable. And as we're following the laws in the news now, with the laws coming into place because of this amazing proliferation of drones, where are they all getting it from? Because of this proliferation of drones out there, right? So that is certainly changing the landscape of the laws. So it's really stay tuned to see what steps will the Malchuta, what Dina de Malchuta, what are the laws that the society that we live in, what will they enact and legislate, and to see if and how that will affect the halachic abiding man's options in these situations. Yes, Steve?
May I go back to the sports
Sure.
illustration? What if we wanted to reintroduce Roman gladiatorial combat? Would that be prevented because of the prevention of suicide and murder?
Gladiators in the full sense. We're not talking about the Sunday afternoon NBC Gladiator show, whatever that is. Right? No, actually to the death.
Yeah.
That would not. It's interesting. What Moshe adds on at the end here, that after I wrote this, I was shown the Nod Yehuda's teshuva, his halachic response, that a person can hunt in order for their livelihood, right? Can hunt for livelihood, even though there's clearly danger, right, involved in hunting. So he said that fit in, right? Something where it is meant to be killing someone else, even if that would become legal, right? That would not be a sport for a good Jewish boy. No, for a halacha abiding person. An example that comes to mind. According to accepted medical practice, American medical practice, brain death is considered dead. In which case, a beating heart could be removed from a brain dead person because that person is dead. And that heart can be removed while it's beating in order to raise the chances of its viability and transplanted to someone else. Now, according to halacha, there are two opinions if we can follow brain death or not as the time of death. Okay? Because from a halachic point of view, the question is, when does the soul leave? Now, the Talmud is very, very clear that when the heart has stopped and there's no breathing, not talking about a person who has fainted, right? But then that is considered the time of death. There are those that argue that, well, brain death is, now, Halacha would also clearly agree that if, heaven forbid, a person was decapitated, even though the heart is still beating, that person is dead. When the head is no longer attached to the body, even though the heart is beating, that person is dead. And theoretically, a heart could be taken out while it's beating to be used for a transplant. So those who argue from a Jewish halachic point of view with brain death will say that brain death is a physiological decapitation. It might be physically attached, but for all intents and purposes, there's been a decapitation here. In which case, the heart beating. Now, I would venture to say most poskim are not comfortable with that. I'm not saying that most poskim will disagree, but most poskim will say either they'll disagree, as a majority will either disagree or be unsure. And if you're unsure, then you say, well, that's not death. Okay, where are they going with this? Oh, so now, if you have an Orthodox, halacha, Jewish law abiding doctor, he is not going to want to put himself in a situation where he'll be forced to remove the beating heart of a brain dead person. Because according to halacha, that is murder. According to the view that is not yet brain death, then removing a person at the very end of their life, you can't even move their eyelids. You don't move a finger. You don't move the person at all. We compare the soul to a light, to a fire, and the body is the candle. And we know that when a candle is flickering, the slightest motion can cause that flame to go out on the candle. And that's how we're viewing the tenuous connection between the soul and body at those very last moments, right? It can be last hours or last days. So we don't want to do anything which might cause that soul to leave. So there we have a situation where Dina de Malchuta Dina says it's fine, right? The law of the land says it's fine. That's what you should do. Or in the gladiator case, if that would come about, that's perfectly fine. Everyone signed up for it. Well, that might be fine, right? But usually the Dina Malchuta Dina that we have, the law of the land is law. That's when it comes to monetary things, right? We need to apply that, right? If the law of the land, allows for things that are considered murderous or things that are considered gross immorality, right? We don't say, oh well, that's the law of the land, and therefore I can partake. So we, to the best of my understanding, we would not allow that, even if that were to become the law of the land.
What about when people are put on a machine, breathing machine? I mean, what halacha? What is their halacha? You know what I mean?
That gets very, very
Get them off the
intricate.
machine, to
Yeah.
keep them off the machine.
Yeah. Those are specific cases. The general parameters are that we cannot withhold the basics from a person. The basics meaning oxygen, hydration, nutrition, and even basic antibiotics.
So you can't turn off the machine.
Once the machine, if the person is,
It's keeping let's say this machine is keeping the person breathing alive. I don't know about brain dead, but and once you turn off the machine, the person is
okay, so it gets very complicated. Anything heroic we don't need to do, and actually we shouldn't do. The chest compressions that are going to stop breaking ribs and breaking the sternum, and a very small chance of, right, we don't do, right? But taking something away, right? It's, the question really is, should such a person have been put onto that? Or should we say that put the little what they call them, with the oxygen over there, to facilitate their own breathing. But when they stop breathing on their own, we don't need to be like a balloon, filling it up, right? Right. Sometimes in those situations, if there's a time where the machine needs to be turned off for a moment for another reason, for whatever it is, then we wouldn't necessarily turn it back on, right? But as the term, right, those who are my age remember the case of Karen Ann Quinlan. That's forever etched in my mind. I think I was a teenager at the time. I remember that was a big case, pulling the plug, right? So that's that's something that we don't do. That is.
Excuse me, Rabbi. So as long as the heart is beating, the soul is there. I understood that.
Like I said, it's hard for us to know. We can't measure this. There's no way of measuring the soul. We can measure the heart beating. We can measure the brain waves. We can't measure when the soul leaves, right? So that's why the halachic time of death is a very, very extensive topic. Okay, but it's certainly not clear that brain death is halachic death, and I venture to say most are not comfortable with that position. Either they're dead set against it. Sorry, bad choice of words. They're fully against it, or they're not comfortable to say yes, it is.
Because I've been to cases in Colima, one in Colima and one in Guadalajara, that the hospital is like putting pressure in the family. Why don't you sign for disconnection? Why don't you sign?
Yes, and I've had situations of that in Irvine also, not just in Guadalajara. Yeah, the basic thinking here, if I want to be very callous, right, then I'll say that it's a matter of insurance. They're trying to save money on insurance. But even if I won't push it that far, but there is in our society this idea of quality of life. And there's no quality of life, so why is it worth living? But again, we don't view life as something that we control and that we are the masters of. And as we say at the end of each funeral, Hashem Natan, Hashem Lakach. God has given, God has taken, Yehi Shem Hashem Levarach. May the name of God be blessed. We can't give life, we can't take life, whether it's our own, whether it's someone else. It's not our determination of there's quality of life, there's not quality of life. Life is a quality that goes far beyond what we can determine. And again, coming from a Torah point of view, who knows if it isn't just this 10 more minutes of pain that the person is experiencing. Who's to know if that won't serve as a complete atonement for things that they've done, and that will allow them to reach the highest heights of heaven. I mean, we're entering into a realm that it's not for, that we don't know what's going on. And so often I tell this to family members. Sometimes they expect it's going to be so fast and it lingers. You never, I always say, it's not our time clock. We have no idea all that goes into the time when a person is born and the time when a person's life ends. And we respectfully stand back. We don't need to do anything heroic. We don't need to be the hero. But we also can't be the executioner, and we also can't be the withholder of the basics if they are there for us to give. Doesn't mean you have to put everyone onto a respirator, right? But make sure they're getting enough oxygen, right? Put the nodes. What are they called? They put those little things that go by the nose over there. Just sits there. It's non-intrusive, and it just gives a higher percentage of oxygen available for them to breathe. Right? Make sure that they're getting some nutrition. Right? They shouldn't starve. Very often the doctors will say the doctors will say, look, it's not worth putting them through anything further, right? And they're not going to die from malnutrition. Okay, they're not going to die from malnutrition, right? You're not going to start with a feeding tube, but in each case is really, every person is a world, so each case is really its own question, with its own nuances and details. Yeah. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here. Yasher koach.